The movie starts near the end of World War II with a Japanese kamikaze pilot named Koichi. He's in a plane in a group with a bunch of other planes, all of whom are headed off to war, which could very likely mean death for all of them. But Koichi is scared. He doesn't want to sacrifice his life for an emperor who he's never met and who probably doesn't even care about him. And so he makes the decision to feign technical difficulties with his plane so that he can go off to this nearby mechanic island to, allegedly get his plane fixed. So he flies over and lands his plane on this island, and he has the mechanics start taking a look at it, but obviously, there's nothing wrong with it, so there's nothing for them to repair. And one of the mechanic guys, the head mechanic guy, who is named Takibana, kind of susses out what's going on, and he confronts Koichi about it. But instead of being upset about it, he actually seems to support this move. And this is where the central idea of the movie first gets brought up for the first time. And that idea is the value of human life. Koichi is ashamed of the fact that he is fleeing his duty because, he doesn't really value his life all that much. And he more just he fled from his fate out of cowardice. But Takibana sees it differently, and he understands that the war is coming to an end, and so, dying honorably at this point is not really something that's even worth doing. So Koichi stays on the base until nightfall, and this is where we get our first encounter with Godzilla. And the big Goji man is not quite as big as you might know him yet, but he's still pretty large, and he comes onto this island and starts attacking everyone. And so the mechanics are like hiding in this little shelter, and they tell Koichi to go to his plane and use the gun in his plane to start shooting at Godzilla. And so, Koichi sneaks over there and gets in the plane, and he like has his hands on the controls, and he's about to fire, but then Godzilla kind of looks over at him, and he freezes out of fear, and then he loses the shot as Godzilla goes after all the other mechanics. And eventually, Koichi gets knocked out, and so he wakes up the next day to discover that all the mechanics on the island are dead, except for Takibana, who blames him for all of these deaths, which just, compounds the guilt that he's already experiencing after, fleeing from the war effort. And so with all that on his conscience, he heads back to his home, the area where he used to live. But unfortunately for him, his bad luck is not up yet, because when he gets to the place where he used to live, he discovers that his house was destroyed in the American bombings of Tokyo. And a neighbor, or I guess it's a neighbor, like a family friend named Sumiko, informs him that his parents are dead, and she blames him for the death and says that it's people like him who are responsible for, the Japanese losing the war. So Koichi goes to this market in the middle of town, and this woman runs by him holding a baby, and she's being chased down, presumably for like stealing, and she just dumps this baby in his arms and runs off. He's like, what? And so he considers leaving the baby behind, but he decides to not do that, and he ends up meeting back up with the woman. And turns out the woman's name is Noriko, and this baby who's named Akiko isn't even hers. She just rescued her from, like, I guess a house where her parents died and decided to keep her. And Koichi questions why she would have even done this, since it would have been so much easier to just, leave the baby behind and focus solely on survival. And I think the fact that he is, like, so unable to even understand the mentality of saving lives, it just goes to show how much his culture, as well as his own personal guilt, has just warped his sense of the world. So Noriko follows Koichi back to his the ruins of his house, where he's basically set up camp, and she just kind of forces herself on him and just kind of decides to become an uninvited guest, and he very begrudgingly decides to start supporting her and the baby. And so from there, over the course of the next couple years, the three of them start living as a family unit. Koichi goes out and gets a job as a minesweeper, where he's cleaning up these old mines that are left in the ocean from the war. And Noriko stays home and takes care of the baby with help from Sumiko, who's become like their neighbor, basically. And this part of the movie is so important to me because it's almost like the movie is saying that this stuff, men going out and doing the essential work that they do, and women doing the essential work that they do, is the stuff of life. And the message of the movie is that life is valuable. And at this point, Koichi doesn't want this life. He accepted it begrudgingly and kind of fell into it. And he's still kind of battling his guilt from the past. But nevertheless, it is the life that he needs in order to kind of teach him to let go of that stuff. Now, in the interim, American nuclear testing has made Godzilla significantly more powerful, which is so funny to me because that's such an American thing to do, to be like, oh, whoops, we just unleashed this gigantic monster on Japan. Sucks to be you guys. Eventually, Koichi and his mind-sweeping crew get sent out to sea to stall Goji Boy, and it doesn't go very well. And we get this really great tense scene where, like, Godzilla's just following them and his head is just sticking out of the water as they're trying to escape. And, like, they put some bombs in his mouth and blow him up, and it's like it blows his head off, and then he just regenerates. He's basically invincible. And then this big ship shows up and starts, hitting him with cannons and shit. And they seemingly take him out because he goes under the water, but then he just comes back and just decimates the ship with his atomic breath, and it's pretty awe-inspiring, honestly. And so since they failed to stop him, Godzilla ends up attacking Japan and going on a pretty awesome rampage through Tokyo. There's a brief scene I don't like where Godzilla picks up this train car that Noriko is sitting in, and it kind of makes for like a lame and fake-looking action scene. But overall, the rampage is pretty awesome. Koichi and Noriko eventually end up together in the throng of people that are all fleeing Godzilla, which is a little convenient, but it is what it is. And a bunch of tanks on land start firing on him, but Godzilla doesn't like that very much, and so he just decimates them with his atomic breath, and that creates this shockwave that supposedly kills Noriko, although it's pretty obvious that it's a fake out. But it might be obvious to us, but it's not obvious to Koichi, who becomes very upset and basically vows revenge. And through all of this, the government of Japan has been extremely incompetent in, stopping Godzilla. And so that leads a group of men to basically take matters into their own hands, and they start formulating a plan to kill Godzilla on their own. And so Koichi joins them, and his part of the plan is to use a plane to draw Godzilla out to sea, where he's going to be surrounded by all these ships, and they're going to do this whole complicated maneuver in order to try to kill him. But in order to do that, he needs a plane, and in order to get his plane working, he needs a mechanic. And so Koichi is insistent that that mechanic be Takibana, the mechanic from the beginning of the movie on the island. And so he eventually tracks down Takibana and convinces him to help, and they secretly, unbeknownst to the other people, they turn the plane into a kamikaze plane with like a bomb in the front, which is meant to be used as basically a last resort if the other guys fail to stop Godzilla with their plan. And so eventually all this planning leads to this climactic battle that is pretty awesome. It's about as epic as I could have hoped for it to possibly be. The other group members execute their plan, but predictably it doesn't work, and so Koichi ends up needing to fly the plane directly into the mouth of Godzilla, and he detonates it, which basically kills Godzilla and blows his head off and just leaves him sinking. But wait, it wasn't a kamikaze plane after all. And this is where we get one of my favorite scenes of the movie, where we get a flashback of Koichi and Takibana during the construction of the plane, where Takibana installed this ejector seat and told Koichi to remember baby Akiko, the baby that him and Noriko are taking care of, and to live for her, basically. And this, of course, signifies that he's forgiven Koichi for the incident that happened on the island at the beginning. And that, I think, just gives him the final push that he needs to let go of all that guilt from the past and just execute this incredible victory for everyone where not a single life is lost. He gets back to land and reunites with Noriko and the baby, and besides a final scene setting up a potential sequel, that's basically the end of the movie. I said in my video of the best horror films of the decade that I think not only is this movie a good movie, but it's actually an important movie, and it's one that we need today in the West. We are here at a point culturally that is very similar to post-war Japan, albeit for different reasons, where basically human life is just not valued. The anti-natal movement grows bigger and bigger every year. Suicide and overdose rates are high, abortion rates are high, and in many countries and provinces, euthanasia is becoming a legal and socially acceptable way out for people who are struggling with their mental health. And this movie, to me, whether the filmmakers realize it or not, is kind of an answer to that. Koichi chooses life, and that ends up saving and transforming the lives of so many people around him. This is something that I saw someone mention in a YouTube comment, and I haven't been able to unsee it about the movie since. Noriko, Takibana, Sumiko, and the whole crew of the minesweeping vessel are all better off because Koichi chose to live, and I think that's something we need to remember. Because you might not end up saving your entire country from a monster, that's pretty unrealistic, but I don't know, you might improve the life of your neighbor, and that's something. And that's what this dramatic, exciting, and ultimately beautiful film has to say. But don't take my word for it, go see it for yourself. And if you have seen it, I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments. And with that said, I'll see you in the next review.